Are you ready? This session begins now. Are you ready to tap into the irresistible power of strategic storytelling? It's time for Kendra Hall's keynote, Stories That Stick, hosted by Vice President of U.S. Sales, Lori Truman.
Hello, USANA. Welcome to the first general access session of this first ever Americas and Europe convention. We are kicking things off with an irresistibly powerful keynote. So listen in and be sure to ask any questions you have in the live chat. At the end of this session, we will get to as many of them as possible. Everyone has a story, but which story do you need to tell and why is it so important to your business? In her new book, Stories That Stick, our keynote speaker says the moment you take control of your stories, you take control of your business and life. Kendra Hall is President and Chief Storytelling Officer at Stellar Collective. She is a best-selling author, sought-after keynote speaker, contributing editor to Success Magazine, and award-winning storyteller. In 5th grade, what began as a storytelling assignment grew into a passion for not only telling stories, but a mastery for teaching others the method and science of storytelling so they can be better to tell their own. She's the mother of a beautiful son and daughter, loves to spin not only stories, but cycling. Although I am trying to help her find a passion for running. She is one of our favorites and a dear friend of mine. Please welcome Kendra Hall.
Thank you so much, Lori. I will start running eventually. And USANA, thank you so much for having me here with you. I am honored and I can't wait to get started. And actually, I do want to start right there with what you heard about in the introduction. I told my very first story, which is what we'll be talking about here together, when I was in 5th grade. It was an assignment. We were supposed to choose a children's book and then go read it to a 3rd grade classroom. So I chose a book. I went into the classroom, but it was right at the end of the day. And there were kids bouncing off the walls. I mean, the classroom was pure chaos. And I made a decision in that moment to just put the book down and tell the story instead. And within the first few sentences, I held those 3rd graders in the palm of my hand. And I knew right then, even at 11 years old, there was something to this. I kind of liked the power. So I started testing the power of storytelling right there. From that moment on, I tested it at home with my brother and sister. I tested it with my parents when maybe I came home a little late for curfew, but I needed them to understand exactly why. I tested the power of storytelling in university, in my sales and marketing job. But actually, there's a story I want to tell you here today before we get into all of the content, and I sure hope you're ready to take some notes. Lori mentioned it. I love to spin, like indoor cycling class. That is my exercise of choice. I know USANA, you're all about health. And for a while, I was also a spin instructor. Yes. I taught spin class. And I gotta tell you, teaching a fitness class is a daunting task, not only because you have to motivate people and get them sweating, but also, particularly when it comes to spin class, you gotta be worried about the music. Because if you play music nobody likes, no one will come, and you'll end up talking or teaching to an empty room full of bikes. Now I wanna pause for a second here, because depending on where you are in your USANA business, you might have a similar fear. That fear of sharing your message, sharing these products, but what if nobody's listening? So I had a strategy. Remember, I am a storyteller. So my strategy was, I didn't know if people were going to like my music. I didn't know if they were going to like to spin to Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys, Paulina Rubio, Dahlia. I mean, all of these songs. And so before every song I played, I would tell a story. And there was one in particular, I remember, it was a song by Kylie Minogue. It's a very poppy song. I think it's called Can't Get You Out of My Head. And I didn't know if people were gonna go for this song, so I decided to tell a story right there in spin class. It was a story of when I first met my now husband, Michael. Michael and I worked together, and I remember the first day I got the job, I walked into the office and I saw him sitting there, and I thought to myself, oh, there you are. I will marry you. I've been looking for you my whole life, and now look, I've found you. Now, unfortunately, Michael didn't realize right away that we were going to be married, so I had to convince him for a little bit. And I remember one afternoon in particular, the boss came in, said, hey, we need somebody to go pick Michael up from the airport. I knocked everybody out of the way. I was like, I'll do it. I will do it. So I got in my car. I pulled up at the airport in my silver Grand Am, and Michael wheeled his suitcase, put it in the trunk, and as he sat in the passenger seat next to me, I had that song playing on the chorus, which was, I just can't get you out of my head. Boy, your love is all I think about. Because I wanted to be subtle. It's true, there is nothing subtle about me. So anyway, I'm in spin class, I tell that story, the song plays, everybody chuckles, everybody enjoys it, and what happens is, over time, as I tell the stories, more people start to come to my spin class. Soon the spin class sells out. Soon every week there's a wait list. People are being turned away at the door. Now, I want to make a really important point here, and this is why I'm telling you this story, is there is a chance that there'd be people watching me, right? And say, well, she must have something special. There must be something unique about her. She must just be really good at exercise. I could never teach a spin class, but they would be wrong. What I was doing was tapping into the most natural thing that all of us have, the most natural way to draw people in, to bring people together, whether we're talking about an exercise class or we're talking about you and your business. If you tell it, they will come. If you tell your story, if you tell lots of stories, if you keep telling stories, you never have to worry of whether or not people will be joining you, will be becoming a part of this community. If you tell it, they will come. Now, I will say I retired from teaching spin a while ago. I am now a retired spin instructor, but I'll never forget my last day of class. Class ended. We're out in the lobby afterwards, and student after student came up to me and said, I will miss the exercise, but more than anything, I will miss your stories. That is the kind of impact your stories can have if you choose to tell them. And today, I'm gonna teach you how. Are you excited or what? The truth is, you don't have to be excited. I have enough excitement about storytelling, if you couldn't already tell, for all of us. All right, so let's break down how the rest of our time together is what we'll be talking about here. First, I want to start with, why does storytelling work so well? What's happening when we hear stories? What's happening when we tell stories? Because here's the thing, I'm not gonna lie to you and say that this is easy. Telling stories takes more work. It takes more investment of your time and energy, and I want you to have no doubt that that investment is worth it. From there, we're going to spend some time talking about what a story is not. Now, here's the good news. You've probably heard about the importance of storytelling in your USANA business before. Storytelling is becoming a buzzword in business. Great for me. It means job security, and a job that I kind of made up, if I'm totally honest. But the problem with it is, there are a lot of things that we think are stories. So we think we're telling stories, but they're not. So we miss opportunities. And then lastly, I want to leave you here today with some very specific do's and don'ts to get you started. Now, you know that I'll be back tomorrow for the masterclass, where we will be diving deep into how to find your stories and how to craft them in a compelling way, and more about telling them. But for right now, let's start here. Let's start with this. Why does storytelling work so well? Now, I mentioned earlier that it is the most natural form of human connection we have. And you know what? We need connection now more than ever. I don't know about you, and I don't know what phase you're at in the course of the pandemic, but I miss people. And the thing that makes me feel connected are people's stories. Now, there's a reason that storytelling is so effective, and that is, I know, you guys are based in science. You are the kings and queens of science. Did you know that there is science behind the power of storytelling? In fact, neurologist Paul Zak wanted to put the power of storytelling to the test, to not just talk about it in terms of, oh, it's human connection, or, oh, it's something that tugs on the heartstrings, but rather, is there something that happens in our brains when we hear a story that makes them irresistible? So here's what he did. He gathered a group of test subjects. He drew their blood beforehand so he would have a control. Then he brought them into a room and played for them a short video. The video told a story. There were characters to care about. There was an emotional component, specific details. And then afterwards, he drew their blood again and compared the two panels. What he found was raised levels of two very important chemicals, cortisol and oxytocin. Now, why does this matter to you? Why does this matter when it's drawing people in and building your business and sharing these products? Well, number one, cortisol is responsible for increased focus and attention. Now, I know you probably had that experience when you're speaking live or even on a Zoom call where you're talking and you can see the people looking at you, but you know they're far, far away. Right? This happens with me and my kids sometimes. It happens to the best of us, right? And there's a reason that this happens. I want you to think about, well, there's a reason that storytelling can be the antidote for this. We're always thinking about, how do we get someone's attention? How do we stop the scroll in social media? The release of cortisol forces our brains to pay attention when we hear a story. What an incredible hack. Are you tapping in to that? And then, of course, the second chemical was oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is known as the trust hormone. This is how we increase empathy and emotion. This is how we make people feel about something. Make no mistake. I mean, there are a million different logical reasons for people to say yes to you. More than a million, I would argue. But we never make a decision based on logic. We make the decision first based on what we feel and then backfill that decision with logic. You've heard that quote, right? People won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. But have you ever really thought about that? I'm sure you've heard that quote before, right? Have you ever really thought about that? Like, how do you make someone feel something? You get that release of oxytocin, and to get that, you tell a story. And the other reason that I want to talk about here today of why storytelling is so powerful is stories stick. It sounds like a good title of a book, don't you think, guys? What do you know? That's the title of the book that I wrote, Stories That Stick. But here's the thing. Storytelling has a leveraging point that no other form of communication, no other form of information exchange has. And that is, the storytelling process is a co-creative one. For example, as I am telling you my story, you are creating your own version of it in your mind. You're taking my words and adding your images to it. And because you participate in the creation of that story, it will stick with you longer. Now, let me ask you, for those of you who have taken a spin class before, I mean, it's intense, I'm not gonna lie. But when I was telling you the story about spin class, weren't you picturing spin studios that you've been in before? Or when I was talking about picking Michael up from the airport, weren't you imagining an airport arrival gate where you've picked someone up before, or where someone has picked you up? Yes, That is your brain naturally tapping into the story, co-creating it, and making sure that it stays with you longer. Now, Rudyard Kipling said it, if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. And I think it's important to say, as entrepreneurs, and Amy and Kevin were talking about this earlier, I know that you're not doing this just to do it. You are here to leave your legacy. You are here to make your mark, to lead your team, to leave a legacy for your family or your community or the earth as a whole. The way you build your legacy is by leaving a story, a trail of your stories in your wake. Okay, so there are just a few of the reasons why storytelling is so effective, but there is a problem. I mentioned this earlier. There are a lot of things out there that we think are stories. So when we're using them or talking about them, we think we're telling a story, but we miss the opportunity, what storytelling can really provide. So what I'd like to do now is talk to you a little bit about a few of the key things that we often think are stories, but aren't. So let's start at the top. A story is not a list of features, facts, or results. Now, bullet point lists are valuable. We need to have those from time to time to give an abbreviated version of all that you have to offer. But I want to give this challenge to you here. I mean, let me ask you, have you ever felt the oxytocin flowing after a list of facts? No! So here's the thing. Anytime you see a bullet point list, that is a cue for you to look at those bullet points and think, what story could I tell here that would bring this bullet point to life? The same is true for gorgeous social media posts or a catalog or an online brochure or all of the different ways that you're sharing the products, that you're sharing the opportunity. You can't just put a brochure in front of somebody and say, here it is, and think to yourself, it will speak for itself. No, you can't, the pretty pictures on the page can't start talking. You still need to fill in those stories. It's not incredible ingredients and science. And I know, again, you've got the ingredients, you've got the science. One of the team members said that I'm getting set up with the new skincare line, and I'm so excited. Here's the thing. I don't need to know all of the ingredients in there. I mean, it's good to know, and there's a place for that. But what I really want to know is how I'm going to feel when I look in the mirror and I see myself. I mean, I'm approaching 40 years old. I feel like I'm permanently 27. It's all what's within. But I want to look in the mirror and say, yeah, you're who I know you to be. Tell those stories. And lastly, a story is not vague, high-level jargon or values or promises. And we see this a lot in this industry, and that's the thing with jargon is we don't realize that it is jargon. Okay, so here's one example. How many of you are passionate about what you do here? Of course you are. You wouldn't be here at this live broadcast if you weren't. But let me assure you, just saying, I am passionate about what I do here is the least passionate way to express what you do with USANA. For example, I was working with a woman who was she was in this industry, and one of her reasons for building a business, for example, is that she wanted to have more time freedom to be with her family. Now, maybe for some of you, maybe that's a reason for engaging in the USANA opportunity. And so I asked her, I said, okay, so what does that look like? What does it feel like? And she said, it feels like freedom to spend more time with my family. And she just kept saying that over and over again. And then we found a moment. You see, at her kids' school, this was several years ago, but at her kids' school, they have a day called Author Day. And it is a huge event, like a school-wide event, Author Day, where all of the kids go all out. They dress up as their favorite character from a book or their favorite author. They come in costume. There's a huge parade. And every year, the mother would dress her kids up, put them in costumes, take them to school for Author Day, drop them off, and then drive the 45 minutes to her office and go to work. And then at noon, her cell phone would start ringing, and she would pick it up, and there would be pictures of her kids at Author Day. Pictures that someone else had taken because she couldn't be there. And it broke her heart. And there was one Author Day where she said, never again. I want the freedom to be there for Author Day. So she doubled down on her business. She started working harder. She started reaching out to her friends and family members. And the next year, by the time Author Day rolled around, she dressed her kids up. She brought them to school. And at noon, yes, her phone was filled with pictures of her kids at Author Day. Photos that she herself had taken. Now, doesn't that feel completely different than I want the freedom to spend more time with my children? Here's the thing. You have these moments in your experience with USANA. No matter what point you're at on your journey, you have these moments where you knew, this is exactly why I am doing this. Those moments, big or small, are stories you need to be telling. Those are the kinds of stories that when somebody else hears it, they say, oh, I want that. Those are the stories. Now, we'll be talking tomorrow about, okay, how exactly do you find these stories? But the last thing I want to share with you here as we're talking about what a story is not, is don't fool yourself into thinking that the only thing that qualifies as a story is some big, huge ordeal, a big success or a huge challenge. Even small stories, story of Author Day, can make a big difference. All right, so we talked a little bit there about what a story is not. Now what I'd like to do is discuss a few of the do's and don'ts when it comes to storytelling. And this is storytelling in person. This is storytelling virtually. This is storytelling on social media. Let's get to it. The first, what should we do? Should we start with a do? Let's start with a do. Do, start with a few key stories. If you're just getting started, if this is just the beginning of your journey, the first two stories that you need to find, the first two stories you need to figure out are your product story and your opportunity story. So here's what I want you, here's a little exercise for you. I want you to stop, well, not right now. Right now I want you to keep listening, but when we're finished here, I want you to stop for a moment. And I want you to think back over the last 6 months. And those moments those moments in these last 6 months where USANA, in a big way or a small way, made a very big difference for you. Maybe it was a moment of self-care. Maybe it was a moment of relief. Maybe it was a moment. Think about those moments and then build a story around them. Those are the stories that you can tell. Start first with your product story and your opportunity story. Now, a question that I often get asked about the opportunity story, particularly from people who are just at the beginning. And if you are at the beginning, hi, congratulations, welcome, we're so happy you're here, is what if I don't have an opportunity story yet? What if I'm just getting started in my business? Well, what I would say to you is this, two things. Number one, use a story from one of your leaders. Think about the person that you're following. Think about the person who brought you in and the incredible things that they're achieving. You can tell their story, borrow other people's stories. That's why it's so important to be sharing stories with each other. And number two, you can share the story of what you're hopeful for. You can share the story of your dreams. So do start there. Find a few stories and then get them down really good. These are stories that you will be telling over and over and over again. And the other thing that I would recommend, see, look, you see all these bullet points here and I'm like, but I've got so much to say about each one of them. The other thing I would recommend is when you're getting started with your stories, when you're really focusing on these stories, do get yourself a story committee. If you're gonna test out a few of your stories, because sometimes they do take a little bit of advanced investment, find a few of your team members, find a parent or a friend who you know will give you honest feedback and share your story with them. That way you can get a really good sense of what parts of your story are really resonating for people. Okay, let's move to the next one. Next, don't skip the story virtually. Now I know boy do I know it. Look, I'm pretending that you're all around me right now in a stadium. I can feel you, I can feel your energy right now, but let's face it, we're living in a virtual world and we may be for some time, and honestly, I think there's some good to it. I know there are a lot more people watching us live than could have been able to join us in Salt Lake City in the first place. But here's a tendency that I've seen happen across all industries. I mean, we watch it in schools. We watch it as everything's happening virtually, is we get intimidated by the camera. You know, that little circle right there, and we think, we've just got to get to the information. We can't waste our time sharing stories. Or maybe the camera is a little bit intimidating if you're talking into it for a Zoom call or whatever it may be. Remember, on the other side of that camera is a person. That hasn't changed. I've been getting feedback from various people that have seen me speak, that I've worked with before, and one in particular came in from a principal of a high school in, I believe it was Tennessee. And he said, we've really been struggling to keep the teachers, the staff engaged as we've been meeting via Zoom. And he said, so I started incorporating little stories on each call. And the feedback I've been getting, he's like, I can see them paying attention. I can see them watching right there on the screen. But the feedback I've been getting is that people feel so much more connected. And he'd been skipping that part. So don't skip the story virtually. And this is the same thing when you are telling your stories online and on social media. It's really easy to think, I will just post a beautiful stock footage of all the products and say, look at what USANA is doing now, or just post a picture of you, whatever it is. Don't skip the story. Remember, that is what will stop the scroll. That is what releases that dose of cortisol. So make sure that you always tell the story, even online. All right, here's another one. Don't leave this important story out. Now, what I'm about to say is going to sound a little controversial, but just go with me here. Don't assume that your story always has to be directly related to USANA. I know, sounds crazy, but here's the truth. People aren't just saying yes to the product. They're not just saying yes to the opportunity. They are saying yes to you. They want to know you. They want to feel like they can trust you. They want to know that you will be able to lead them to what they're looking for. They want to feel like you're a friend. And the way that we do this is by sharing stories from our entire life. I'll never forget, I saw an influencer on social media, and she, is in this business, and she posted a picture with a bicycle. Now, she could have told the story about the product, she could have told any story, but instead the story she decided to tell was the story about the day she learned how to ride her bike, and how many times she fell down, and how she yelled at her dad because, and any dad who has taught his daughter how to ride a bike, you know this is true, right? He's like, I'm not gonna let go, I'm not gonna let go, and then the bike took off, and what did he do? He let go. She told this whole story, and then at the end of it, she said, this is a lesson I think we all need to learn sometimes. Sometimes we have to let go in order to get what it is that we really want. And that moment of storytelling, that moment of authenticity, you want to talk about, now this happened on social media, you want to talk about engagements and comments. And I read that story, I want to say, a year and a half ago. And it stayed with me, because I started thinking about when I learned to ride a bike. So think about those. I mean, if you are a cat lover, tell stories about your cat. If you're a mountain climber, tell stories about climbing mountains. If you are a cook, God bless the cooks. I cannot cook to save my life. But any of those passions that you have, incorporate those stories into your posts, into your calls, into your meetings, so that people get to know the whole person. Because every story you tell about who you really are increases the surface area, increases the different points of contact where someone hearing that story can say, oh, they're a lot like me. Maybe I could do what they're doing. All right. Lastly, I want to leave you with this. Do tell your why story. And I would say that's the third key story you need to work on: your product story, your opportunity story, and your why story. But here's the thing, and you probably heard that you need to tell your why story, but I don't want to talk about telling your why story out there. I want to talk about the importance of telling your why story in here. Listen, I know this business. I know it isn't always easy. I know that being an entrepreneur, that trying to deliver this message of health and wellness when maybe people don't want to hear it, I know it can be a whole lot of ups and downs and whiplash, and you might forget sometimes. You might be so focused on the to-do list that you forget about the for why list and for who list. But let me assure you, you will be your best when you are connected to why you're really doing this. I have one of those stories. A story I tell myself when I'm questioning myself. I'm sure I'm not the only one who questions. Raise your hand if you question yourself. I see people all around you. They're waving their hands. This story happened several years ago. You should know this. You heard in the introduction that I have a son. He'll be going into 4th grade. He had a teacher whose name was Mrs. Barton. He wanted to call her Mrs. Farton. So there's that. And then I have a daughter. She is just about to turn 8 years old, and she has this wild blonde hair and this face full of freckles, and I call her a force of nature. My mother calls her karma, so you know a little bit more about her right now. But this story happened several years ago. I was just starting my entrepreneurial journey, just starting to teach the world about this thing that I had discovered when I was 11. And I was working so hard, and I was trying so many things, and I had really exciting things happen, and then really frustrating things happen, and I was distracted and questioning why I even chose to do this in the first place. Was it worth it? And I was at home with my daughter. She was about 3. We were on the bedroom floor, and she was building something with blocks, and she could tell I was distracted. Women have the ability even at 3 years old, to tell when you're distracted. And she looked at me and she said, Mama, we are building a castle. I was like, oh, right, yes. So got some architectural issues with the castle, but we can fix that. Yeah, we've got this. And then she looked at me again and said, and we live in this castle, Mama, because we are two princesses. And I mean, to be thought of as a princess by your daughter, I mean, you really couldn't ask for more, right? Except she always gets to be Ariel, and Ariel is the best one, so I'm frustrated about that. And then she looked at me one more time, and her eyes narrowed a bit, and she said, and it's a big castle, Mama, because we are two princesses who go to work. And even now, I think about that moment, and especially now in these times of uncertainty and chaos, and just when you think you have things figured out, and then they change again, questioning myself, I think back to that moment, that story, that little girl, and the castles I want her to build. And that is a story I will tell myself every day if I have to. So what are those stories, those why moments that you can tell yourself when you need them most? All right, we've been through a lot here already. You now know why storytelling works so well. What a story is, or what a story isn't. We'll be talking about what a story is tomorrow, and a few do's and don'ts of storytelling so you can get started right away. I wish I could see the castles you are building, but I hope you remember that no matter what, if you tell it, they will come.
Thank you, Kendra. And this is why we love you. Such a great storyteller. Come over here and join me.
Great.
We are going to take questions from our live chat that is happening.
I love that. I love it.
Such great content. Thank you so much. So first question comes from Claudia. What happens if you get tired of hearing your own story?
Oh my gosh, Claudia.
Or you feel like others are tired of hearing it as well?
Okay, Claudia, this is such an important question and such a good question.
Yeah.
I would say this, remember that your goal here, your goal in this business is to always be talking to new people. And so yes, you might be tired of telling your story, but new people are hearing it for the first time. And in this business, strategic storytelling, telling stories that stick, it isn't about you. It's about them. So what I would say, and you know, this is my job, I travel around, or I did, and and oftentimes I'm telling the same stories over and over again. And the thing that I remember is, there is one person out there who needed this story at this moment. It's not about me that I'm bored with it. I need to tell it for them.
Yeah, great advice, really good. So another question, Raul and Diana from Mexico, does listening to the mood in the room help, or I would say read the mood in the room, does it help?
To
decide which story you're gonna tell?
Yeah, you know, I think one of the important things, and that's where I mentioned, is starting with two key stories. And this goes back to Claudia's question. Having a product story or an opportunity story that you know, you've told so many times, you know they work no matter the room. Yeah. But then if you do have different rooms of different people, like if you're talking to 20-year-olds, you might adjust and tell a different story that would be more suited to them. But always come back to those two key ones that are tested, tried, and true, and you know they're gonna work no matter who hears it.
Yeah, great advice. I love this question. So Tony from Vancouver says, what's the best tip when you see your audience's eyes glaze over?
See, that is the nice thing. That's the nice thing about being virtually too, is you can't see it. The best tip in that moment is exactly what we're talking about here, is when you see that happen, wrap up whatever information it is that you're delivering and think, okay, what story can I tell that will either illustrate what I've just been talking about, or what story can I tell that will set up for what I'm about to say next? Now, if you're in the middle of a thought and they're glazing over, you got to finish the thought, but then that's the best time to know to go right into a story.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah. Really good advice. So Beatrice from Mexico, I think this is a good question because we have a lot of bilingual business builders, and if I know that multiple languages, this Beatrice obviously speaks Spanish and English, and should she post stories in more than one language, or should she rotate languages?
That is an excellent question. I would say my gut sense, and I'm thinking about my bilingual friends, I think you should post them at the same time. Yeah, I think so.
I would agree.
And then what you could even do is if you're thinking about Instagram, you could do 1 and 2 in the same post, or post them at the same as, do English and Spanish, but do them together. So have one photo for the English and then right away post another one for the Spanish. But I would, make sure you use both languages.
Yeah, good, very good. So Ramon from Iowa, how can I have the same presentation energy as you do as a professional speaker?
I have to, every time I'm about to get on stage, and you can ask the team here, I get really I get nervous. So if that's a good, I get nervous. I think it's more excitement, but I want to do a good job. But right before I come out, I have a moment of gratitude that I have been blessed with a stage. I mean, if you are about to give a presentation, that means that, and that's what this question is, right? That means that you have been given a stage and a platform, and what an honor that is. And then that feeling of gratitude then moves into, and I've mentioned it before, but who is in this room right now that needs to hear this? And there is something about that energy that comes from that it just goes from there.
Yeah, no, I think it's such good advice, because I think having that moment of gratitude, or the way you get into it, whether it's a small stage or a big stage, right?
Yep, any stage, whether it's virtual, whether it's live, no matter, I was talking to a screen the whole time, but I could feel all of you. And I think here's another thing that I would say to that, is I feel like we have in some ways been told, whether overtly or subtly, to hone in on our enthusiasm. I was told that when I first got you're a little too, but if you're passionate about what you're talking about, if you're excited about what you're talking about, remove the throt, or what's that thing on a golf cart, like the governor, that thing that has told us to hold back. Try taking that away.
Yeah, completely agree. Yep, show that passion and let that shine through. For sure. All right, so I think we have time for one more question.
I love questions.
I know, this is good. And we have such great questions coming through the chat.
Yeah.
So how do you get over your fear of telling your why story?
Yeah. I don't know how to give a different answer than what I think about the people. I think about the people in my life who have shared their why stories with me, and what a gift that has been. To then take a piece of what and that has to do with that co-creative process. Every time you are sharing your why story, especially outwardly, inwardly, I'm assuming that's not what the question is about, but outwardly, your audience will be co-creating, and they'll be picturing their own life, and what could happen from there for them is incredible. So it goes back to that, be generous with your stories. somebody needs it.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, showing that passion and that authenticity, and so great. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I could sit here for hours with you and ask you.
Couch when we're done. Can we just hang out?
We will be back though tomorrow.
Right.
So, like all good stories, this session must come to an end. But Kendra will be back tomorrow with her VIP masterclass. And again, Q&A.
Yeah. Well, and I mentioned it in the presentation here, but we will. If your question is about how, that's what we're talking about tomorrow.
Yeah, it'll be such a great session. Kendra's masterclass is VIP access. So if you would like to upgrade your registration to VIP, you can do so at any time. The $19.95 ticket price is 100% donated to the USANA Foundation and unlocks exclusive VIP content. And a quick reminder that this session will be available to go back and watch on demand for 7 days for general access registrants and 30 days for VIP. Again, thank you so much, Kendra, for being here. I am so looking forward to tomorrow. And come on back at 4:45 p.m. Mountain Time. Dr. Rob Sinnott is giving you a sneak peek at the Future Lab. So we'll see you then.
This has been a general access session. For more exclusive content, register for VIP access now. Thanks for watching.